The most lethal war that the whole world has ever been involved in were the World Wars. World War I began on July 28, 1914, and it lasted until November 11, 1918. Almost 20 years after the end of World War I, on September 1st, 1939, the Second World War started. The Second World War started by Germany in an unprovoked attack on Poland.
If you go back a couple years before the start of World War II to 1931, 1931 is when Japan expanded into East Asia with the invasion of Manchuria, and continued to 1936 with a brutal attack on China. This was the beginning of World War II in the Pacific, also known as the War in the Pacific.
After World War I, Japan was in a bad economic position. There were several things that contributed to this happening. The Great Kanto earthquake had destroyed Tokyo and Yokohama and the areas in the surrounding them. The Great Depression, which occurred in the 1930s, worsened Japan's already poorly economic state.
In 1931, Japan invaded the district of Manchuria in China. This was done so that Japan could have access to much-needed resources. Japan was a major party of the League of Nations and condemned the Japanese invasion of China. In 1933, Japan officially left the Legion. Japan then attacked the rest of China in 1937. The war between Japan and China that broke out in 1937 is known as Sino-Japanese War. Then on July 17, 1937, Japan invaded China. In 1940, Japan went into French Indochina, which is also known as Vietnam. While doing this, Japan joined the Axis powers of World War II with Germany and Italy. Over 6 million were killed in World War II. That is equal to 3% of the world. Japan had $56 billion total cost of World War II. The Prime Minister of Japan, Hideki Tojo, entered military school in 1899, following the footsteps of his father, a professional military man who served as a lieutenant in the Sino-Japanese War and as a major general in the Russo-Japanese War.
He came to power when he appointed the Army Minister and Japanese Prime Minister Fumaro Kino's new cabinet, and then was named the 40th Prime Minister. It took him a while to lose his power, but he rejected the American counter-proposal for peace, submitted his letter for resignation of his position as Prime Minister of Japan. He later attempted suicide but failed. He was sentenced to death November 1948 by a hanging. In December 23, 1948, he passed away. Emperor of Japan Hirohito was separated from his parents as a child. He got his education at Pierce School. He later attended an institute to become an emperor. He came to power because his father had died, so he took over. He lost his power because they lost World War II.
It's important to understand that Japan had much less technology than Germany. Although the Japanese government was very interested in Nazi techniques of popular persuasion, Japan lacked the economic power and infrastructure to make a sophisticated mass marketing campaign. For example, in 1940, more than 50% of the population lived in rural communities. Of these, only 6% owned radio sets, and most had only 4 to 6 years of schooling. And disposable income was so low that even a newspaper subscription was beyond the reach of many families. Indeed, rural families were living so near the margin of subsistence that they had very little extra to give. Capabilities in mass communication, if the government wanted to get out a message after the relevant officials had to go out and spread it themselves, as in this case, where the finance ministry of Japan is giving a speech promoting saving to the children parents of local elementary schools. Propaganda in other countries either reflected negatively or positively on Japan.
This cartoon is drawn in the perspective of the Japanese. This cartoon suggests that Japanese expansion is something that can be viewed positively. The large hand that is clutching onto a wrinkled piece of paper with smoke arising on the top suggests that Japan will not listen to the League of Nations, and Japan is more superior in terms of power. The burning of the document suggests that it will be burned under Japan's hold on the League of Nations.
This cartoon is drawn in the perspective of Australians. Australians, as read in the text box, are known for aiding America throughout the process of preventing Japanese expansion. This cartoon suggests that if Japan takes a step on New Guinea to threaten the whole country, then no matter what condition Australia was in, for example, playing their traditional game, like what is drawn on the cartoon with a bat and ball with bars that suggest where the ball goes through, Australia, the kangaroo, will always be ready for a fight against them. The man inside the kangaroo pocket suggests that America will always be teamed up with Australia in order to stop them from anything, but most importantly, expansion.
For Japanese civilians, the war began in July 1937 with the launch of an all-out campaign by the Japanese military in China. The government didn't need to persuade people to express their support for the military. Through gestures such as dressing up boys in military costume for the traditional shrine visit, cooling themselves with fans decorated with military motifs, or rallying to celebrate the fall of Nanking on December 1937. For most Japanese people, the war in China was still a very remote event, and the realities of that brutal campaign were yet to be felt in the homeland.
Their basic battle strategy as World War II came to an end, that was to fight so hard and inflict such heavy casualties on the Americans that the latter would be willing to settle for a peace in which Japan could retain some of its gains, which would not be occupied or disarmed, and would not have its military or civilian leaders trained as war criminals.
Japan entered World War II with limited amiss, and with the intention of fighting a limited war. Their main objectives were to secure the resources of Southeast Asia and much of China, to establish a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere under Japanese hegemony. These are some of the reasons why they lost the war.
By the summer of 1945, the defeat of Japan was a foregone conclusion. The Japanese naval and air force were destroyed. The Allied naval blockade of Japan and intensive bombing of Japanese cities had left the economy and its economy devastated. At the end of June, the Americans captured Okinawa, a Japanese island from which the Allies could launch an invasion of the main Japanese home island. U.S. General Douglas MacArthur was put in charge of the invasion, which was codenamed Operation Olympic, and set for November 1945.
After years of back-breaking battles, fighting island to island across the Pacific, Japan's Navy and Air Force were all but destroyed. The production of material were faltering, completely overmatched by American industry, and the Japanese people were starving. A full-scale invasion of Japan itself would mean hundreds of thousands of dead GIs, and still the Japanese leader refused to surrender. But in early August, America unveiled a terrifying new weapon, dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In a matter of days, on the 6th of August, 1945, the U.S. dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and 3 days later, a second on Nagasaki. With that, in the Soviets' declaration of war on August 8th, the Japanese were forced into a surrender that was virtually unconditional. They finally surrendered on September 2nd, 1945.
Tadamichi Kabashi. In May 1944, the tall and husky Japanese general was handpicked by the Emperor Showa and Prime Minister Hideki Tojo to defend the island of Iron-Jima. Veteran of 30 years with recent field experience in Manchuria and China. He was given the honor to personally meet Emperor Showa in June 1944 on the night before he flew to Iron-Jima. The meeting was an rare event for Shamura, and he was told by the emperor that the American barbarians must be stopped. Kobashi did not share the optimistic some of his peers had, but he performed his duties. He closely studied the island's terrain and decided that he would not fight on the island. He was going to fight from inside the island. Under his instruction, 21,000 men were hidden in 13,000 yards of tunnels. On Mount Shirabaki alone, there were 1,000 cave entrances and piles of boxes. Knowing the American forces could not be defeated, he could only hope to inflict a casualty rate so high that the Americans would turn back. Among his numerous letters to his family during World War II was the note, "You must not expect my survival." That illustrated his unflattering loyalty despite of certain doom that he knew he could not escape, as according to Bushido Code. On March 22nd, Kobashi radioed, "We are still fighting. The strength under my command is now about 400. Tanks are attacking us. The enemy suggests we surrender through the loudspeakers, but our officers and men just laugh and pay no attention." On the next day, he sent Chichi-jima this final message to be relayed on to Tokyo. "All officers of Chichi-jima, goodbye from Io." He reported committing suicide, but his body was never found. Isoroku Yamamoto was Japan's greatest naval strategist who called for an attack on the U.S. fleet in Hawaii. Because he thought U.S. fleet in Hawaii was like a dagger pointed at Japan's throat. Therefore, he thought it had to be destroyed.
Major battles Japan was involved in. December 1941, Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, causing the U.S. to enter World War II. Although the attack was expected by the code that was disapproved by the U.S., it was still surprising and deadly. Fall of the Southeast Asian colonies. Japan took control of more than 1 million square miles of Asian land. Japan won most of the territories owned by the European countries. Doolittle's raid on Japan proved an important physiological point to both America and Japan. This point was that Japan was powerless to attack. This battle raised American morale and took away some of Japanese confidence. Battle of the Coral Sea. In this battle, both Japan and America used a new kind of naval warfare. Ships didn't shoot a single shot, and planes in the sky were the only things to shoot. Battle of Midway. Nimitz' strategy of letting Japan place to attack the island at first, then having American planes sweeping in and attacking back. This turned the tide of the war in the Pacific. February 1942, the Japanese were defeated at Guadalcanal. 6 months of battle on land and at sea finally called for an abandonment by the Japanese, making the U.S. win. On June 15, 1944, American forces invaded the island of Saipan, part of the Mariana Islands in the Central Pacific. Securing Saipan was of critical importance in the U.S. Its airfields would put the Army Air Force's new B-29 bombers within striking distance of the main Japanese. Keeping Saipan was crucial in stopping islands. For the Japanese, keeping Saipan was crucial in stopping the American advance.
The Battle of the Philippine Sea. American and Japanese carriers fought a 2-day sea and air battle off the coast of Saipan. It would go down as one of the biggest carrier battles of World War II. By April 1945, the war in Europe had ended with Allied victory. But the Pacific theater was yet to see its deadliest days. The final land battle of World War II took place more than 350 miles from the main islands of Japan.
Anoka saw 82 days of brutal warfare and horrific conditions at places like Kazaku Ridge, Sugarloaf Hill, and Kunashai Ridge. U.S. Marines and Army troops fought a bloody battle at attrition against an enemy concealed in intricate underground defense systems. When the island was finally secured, 70,000 soldiers of Japanese 32nd Army died, and Okinawa joined as many as 100,000 to 15,000 civilians trapped in the crossfire.
The impact of World War II had on Japan. The impact of World War II had on Japan. September 22nd, 1940, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed a pact creating the Axis Alliance. December 2nd, 1941, the Japanese attacked the U.S. Navy in Pearl Harbor. The next day, the U.S. entered World War II on the side of the Allies. 1945, August 6th, the